Hey everybody, what is happening? Brent Axe here, and we are live on the Syracuse Orange Football Facebook page, coming off the heels of a Syracuse football loss. The Orange fall to NC State on Thursday Night Football on ESPN. An ugly game in Raleigh, to say the least. I guess the good news is, for those of you in Raleigh, you have a Wegmans now, so that's good news. But other than that, not a lot of positive things to discuss on the football front. A pretty ugly game overall, a game that, despite the anemic offense that we saw demonstrated really through four quarters, even with some signs of life late in the game, Syracuse had an opportunity to win the football game in the fourth quarter. I guess that's football, Susan, right? You can play an ugly game like that. Your defense can, time after time, make play after play, but the Syracuse offense really didn't deserve to win this game, and I think the football gods kind of interceded there and made sure that was the case. So your final score is NC State 16, Syracuse 10. The Orange falls to 3-3 on the 2019 season. Syracuse lost 3 games all of last season, and here we are halfway through the 2019 season, and they have matched that number. The Orange will be back at it next week on Friday night, once again, on ESPN. Not a good showing on national TV tonight, and we'll see if the Orange can get it together for another national TV showing next Friday night against Pittsburgh. Great to have you here. If you're live, if you're watching us later on YouTube, just so you know, we do put this on YouTube on the Syracuse Orange Sports page. It's in my recap on syracuse.com as well. You can just search YouTube for Brent Axe video recaps as well. But for those of you live, get in those comments. I'll hop in there and chat with you guys as we go here. But it was an ugly game. It was a game where the word I'm going to keep coming back to is anemic. This was an anemic Syracuse offense. Orange is the new flat, unfortunately, in this case for the Orange. Tommy DeVito clearly more hurt than we were led on publicly. I think Dino Babers and Tommy DeVito were very short in their answers about his status, and we can see why. He had extra padding in this game. Clearly, the way he played, he slid, he avoided contact, ran certain plays, was not even close to the status maybe we led him to believe he could play. He did complete some passes out there. I don't think he was hurting the team necessarily being out there being hurt, but clearly hurt the team in just execution and play calling, and the word I keep coming back to is anemic. Now, there were some bad penalties not called in this game. You go right to the last play of the game. NC State was clearly offsides. It was a desperation play for Syracuse. They had 44 yards to go. I mean, that was going to be a tough play one way or the other, but they're offsides. There was a play. Syracuse was flagged, but after the whistle, Tommy DeVito was knocked down by an NC State defender. That is a penalty. That was called recently in the Tulane-Houston game, even after the whistle. That doesn't get called. A couple key pass interference calls late in the game did not get called. There were a couple that were called that allowed Syracuse to score, but ACC officials absolutely atrocious in this game. That's not what led to Syracuse losing, because they had enough penalties on their own that were self-inflicted, and to have 12 penalties to only 4 for NC State, by the way, 12 penalties out of a bye week, that is not a good look whatsoever. So Syracuse flat in many ways, anemic in so many. Time management, play calling, despite some flashes, the overall play of DeVito, the running game was flat. I'm going to pull up a number here. There's a lot of numbers certainly that do not look good for Syracuse in this game, but there is a number here that is just incredible to think about in this football game, and that is this. Syracuse tried to run the football 37 times. They got 41 rushing yards. That is an average of 1.1 yard per play. Despite having talent at that position, you have Mo Neal, you have Abdul Adams, you have a power back, and Jarvion Howard. They cannot run the football. Their biggest running threat right now is Tommy DeVito when he's got to run for his life at this point. Sacked 8 times in this game, hurried a bunch more. This is an NC State defense that got to Alex Hornibrook, Florida State's quarterback, a couple weeks ago. Same amount of sacks, 8 times. But this is a very young NC State team that obviously still has a long way to go. And despite the absolutely anemic offense by the Orange, they had a chance to win this football game because of their defense, because of great plays by Andrew Armstrong on that third down play down the stretch. Alton Robinson and Kendall Coleman getting pressure throughout the day, overcoming some mistakes, overcoming even some special teams mistakes. Syracuse misses a 44-yard field goal. Sterling hit Hoffrichter at the end of the game, 3 minutes to go. Now, this ended up working because Syracuse used their timeouts wisely and did get the football back, as I mentioned, thanks to that Armstrong play. But, pardon me, they do kick the football off. And Sterling Hoffrichter, again, obviously a very good player, kicks the ball out of bounds. So it's just a night Syracuse cannot get out of their own way in so many ways, but their defense did enough to at least say, here's one more chance to win, and they could not capitalize. So just throw a couple more numbers at you here. Syracuse did have 300 receiving yards on the day, so all told, Syracuse goes out in this matchup tonight. And let's see, 76 plays, 341 yards. NC State, 65 plays for 364 yards. I don't think that really tells the tale of the game, though. I mean, you go back to the first half, a Tristan Jackson 52-yard desperation play at the end of the first half accounted for pretty much half of their offensive yards in the first half of that game. So I think that really tells you the tale there. We brought up the sacks, and it's never a good thing when Syracuse has more penalties than points in a football game, particularly this Syracuse team. Orange is the new fast, and the Dino Babers offense, the high-flying, high-scoring attack has stalled. And I really hate to be a broken record on this, but listen, I think what we saw last year was Eric Dungey hit a lot of deficiencies in this offense. I think it was a better offensive line a year ago, but maybe Dungey, with his ability to scramble, to make plays, with the heart and the desire that he played with, he was a great third down quarterback. I think he hit a lot of the flaws in the offense that we're now seeing starting to bubble up. DeVito's combination of how hurt he is, he's getting more experience game by game, but he's still a hesitant quarterback out there. He doesn't play with half the heart that Dungey plays with at this point, indecisive. And it's just, there was some tension on the sideline tonight. I think Dino Babers mentioned after the game he was under the impression that Taj Harris was hurt. I don't know. This was after Taj Harris was caught on the sideline in a very emotional outburst. Clayton Welch, the backup quarterback, had to come over and calm him down, and then he was seen on camera sitting by himself on the bench. Didn't appear to be injured. If he was injured, he'd be tended to by trainers. He'd be tended. He'd be in a medical tent. He'd be in a locker room. He'd have people around him. He was just sitting by himself. So tension's boiling over, and Syracuse is now, with just one game in the books in full-time ACC play, 2 ACC play games overall. I think we kind of wrote off Clemson as a loss anyway, but they're just one game into this kind of full-time ACC slate, and they're already at a crossroads for the season. Kind of incredible to think about after the season they had last year. Maybe this team overall was more banged up than they're letting on, and, excuses, reasons, there's a fine line there, but overall, not a good night. And to have a bad night is one thing, to have a bad game, but to do it on ESPN. Now, there were other things going on Thursday night. You had, the Major League Baseball playoffs going on. You had the Giants and Patriots playing in the NFL. But inevitably, you're going to flip over as a sports fan to ESPN and see what's going on. And what you saw was a Syracuse team that looked pretty darn flat against NC State. Just a couple more numbers to throw at you here. Appreciate you guys in the comments doing your thing, and I'll hop in there in just 1 second here. So DeVito ended up 29 of 39 for 300 yards and a touchdown, sacked 8 times. But I think we know those numbers are a bit deceiving. A lot of desperation throws, a lot of big plays in the fourth quarter. This offense was anemic, and those numbers do not tell the tale of this night. Tristan Jackson did manage 9 catches for 106 yards. I think he was one of the few bright spots on offense. Did get open, made some big plays, not only the 52-yard desperation play, a couple big catches in the second half as well. Sean Riley, 52 yards on 6 catches. Mo Neal, 6 catches for 48 yards. Taj Harris, we mentioned the frustration that spilled over for him, just 1 catch for 36 yards after he had a big day against Holy Cross 2 weeks ago, over 100 yards and 7 catches in that game. Cam Jordan came in, looked pretty good actually for Taj Harris. He had a couple catches for 18 yards, and that was really it. We mentioned the anemic rushing attack for Syracuse. Mo Neal did lead the way there with 31 yards on 8 carries, including a 12-yard carry, but Syracuse just could not get the running game going at all tonight. So they couldn't get anything going. Penalties, anemic offense. You got to give credit to the defense for keeping Syracuse in this game throughout. and they were tired. They were coming in off of several 3-and-outs and failed offensive drives by Syracuse. So I'm not going to have too much issue with the defense tonight, even though there were some penalties. There were some secondary plays. Antoine Cordy had an absolute inexcusable penalty, giving NC State life. Now, they didn't end up scoring a touchdown on this, but for a 6-year player to give NC State a 1st and goal at the 5-yard line for unsportsmanlike conduct, that I can't even, inexcusable is the word that comes to mind, but that is not a strong enough word to emphasize that a player, any player, a freshman in his first game shouldn't do that, let alone a 6-year player with the experience of Antoine Cordy. Just really frustrating to see that, and it was a frustrating night overall for the Orange. So let's get it going here. Jermaine says, after tonight, all I can say is if the Giants pull off miracles, that's great, because Syracuse football still has a lot more games. But after what I saw, probably not going bowling this year. A lot of you saying how unprepared Syracuse looked, too many penalties out there tonight. Boy, the offensive line, as James notes, they do need work. And we're 6 games into the season now, and I understand that they put some new guys in there. Sam Heckel is not in there once again, so you got to wonder if and when he's coming back at all. But after a while, and I don't know where that line is, but we're starting to get there because we're now in the thick of the season, reasons become excuses. At first it was reasons, inexperience, new starters on the line, but they're kind of becoming who they are. And this is a pretty bad offensive line overall. And I just don't see how they improve unless they make some adjustments on offense. There were times in the second half that DeVito was getting rid of the ball quicker, but clearly Tommy is not where he should be after 6 games. I think that the physical tools are there. Now he's playing hurt. He's playing under duress. He's got an offensive line that cannot protect him. But there are things that that are clearly on him, and that's why Taj Harris got so frustrated. Missing open receivers. There was one play where I think it was a 3rd down and 6, and he was running forward and then inexplicably decides to run backwards. It's like, no, when you decide to run the football, you got to run for the chains. And if you're out there, I understand you're injured, but you're out there, and you got to make plays for your team, at least get to the 1st down marker, which he clearly could have done. Probably would have taken a hit at the end of that play, but, that's football. Let's see. Rob notes, awful commentating, questionable officiating. The game essentially ended when the cheap shot on DeVito went uncalled at the midpoint of the season. We're still scratching our heads over the offensive line. What's the X factor with the offensive line situation? We were just talking about that. I'm surprised that Mike Cavanaugh is not doing a better job. You brought up the name there, Rob, the offensive line coach who's got a pretty good reputation in the college football world, had some missteps here and there, but I thought could come in and really focus in and improve the offensive line. That's just clearly not the case. They're getting beat. They can't get any push in the running game, which they couldn't get against Holy Cross. I mean, it's one thing. NC State's actually got some pretty, up-and-coming players on that defensive line. I think they're going to be pretty good in a year or two, but they cannot run the football. And Dino Babers borrows a lot of concepts from what he learned under Art Briles at Baylor. You kind of want to spread out the field, spread out the defense, and try and run the ball up the gut. But that's all Syracuse does. They have got to implement a better running attack that fits the talent and fits what the offensive line is at this point, because that system is not working. They're not getting the push. They're not getting the holes. They're not getting the speed and what they need from their running backs to get it done at this point. And I put more of the blame there on the play calling and on the line than I do the running backs, because I think this team's got 3 good running backs. They're just not being put in the position to succeed right now. A couple of you saying 6-6 looks like the record this year. Rick saying, please stop blaming the refs. It's all on Cuse. You're right about that. You are right, but it's hard not to notice some of the bad calls. Look, the offense made its own bed. And if bad calls start piling up on you late in the game, you can't go to that as an excuse. But, we're talking about missed calls in the end zone. That play on Cam Jordan was, I don't know where that came from. They said he was out of bounds and came back in. No, that was pass interference. The missed play on Tommy DeVito, you got to call that. There's a referee standing right there, and offsides on the last play. Like, ACC officiating has been bad this year, not just in Syracuse games. I've watched a bunch of ACC games where their officials have just been outright awful. So that's not why they lost. You are right about that. I went over probably 7 or 8 other reasons before we even get to the officials, but it was frustrating to see how bad the officiating was. But of those 12 penalties, a ton of those, a majority of those certainly were self-inflicted. They're offsides. They were, I mentioned the Antoine Cordy penalty, just a lot of dumb things that shouldn't happen, let alone after a bye week when you're supposed to, lay back and correct that stuff, right? Michelangelo says, horrible, Dino's not recruiting well enough. I think recruiting, comes under question for the offensive line, certainly, because now you're starting to get, these are Dino's players, right? This is this staff's players. And did they put enough of an emphasis on the offensive line, and do they have to really hammer that for the upcoming class? I don't have the upcoming class in front of me who they have committed to this point, but clearly, they've really got to get some offensive linemen in tow. I'd have to agree with you there. A few more of you saying about how the refs were bad, but not the reason Syracuse lost, and always becomes a debate about that. But again, you make your own bet. You're down 16-3 in the fourth quarter. You got a chance to win. You got the ball back. 3rd and 7, and Tommy DeVito takes a sack against a 3-man rush. Yeah, NC State was probably offsides on that play, but that's what happened all night. 8 sacks. NC State had, I think, 12 tackles for a loss. It might be off a little bit there, but a ton of plays there. You're still in the game, though. All you had to do was put together really 3 competent drives and put points on the board, and they couldn't do that, and you get out of there with an ugly win. It's much better to talk about an ugly win than a loss like this where you're right on the fringe and just can't get over the hump at this point. So I brought it up. Look, you're 1 game into full-time ACC play. You're back in primetime television next week against Pittsburgh. You've got a quarterback who's clearly more hurt than is being led on, and still went out there and threw for 300 yards tonight. He can play through it, but it's not himself. An offensive line that can't protect him. You can't run the football. So what you're starting to get is frustrated offensive receivers that are open and can't get the football. I don't know why Syracuse doesn't use the tight end more. Use the middle of the field more. Just keep the chains moving. NC State scored. They're at home. They've got a pretty rabid crowd there on a Thursday night prime time, the only college football game on. They scored on a trick play. And I'm wondering, where's that creativity on the Syracuse offense? You got to be careful when you use these plays, and you can't get too cute because defenses can shut it down pretty quickly if you're kind of signaling that. But this just shows you the lack of confidence that is there from Dino Babers in his offense and his quarterback right now. And I could see why, given some protection issues, but you got to shake it up. And that was a great play that NC State ran. It goes to Thomas, and it was kind of similar to the tight end throwback play that Syracuse used in the past. And we all remember Stephen Berminski against Virginia Tech back in the day. You don't see any of that. There was just no creativity. It was just a straight vanilla offense from Babers and Mike Lynch. And this offense today, that surprises me because this is an offense that usually takes some chances. The pace that they went at was bad. They burned too much clock. Now, again, they had the ball late in the game, but they burned way too much clock, went way too slow. There was just not a sense of urgency then. And this is an offense that is nowhere near the pace that they should be at and they want to be at because of a number of breakdowns that we brought up earlier. Doug said that Pat McAfee was awful on commentary. I got to disagree with you guys. John noted it too. I think a lot of people start ragging on the announcers when their team's playing bad. Like if Syracuse was up 40-10, I don't know if we'd get that commentary on the announcers. I like these guys. I'm a little biased because I talked to Matt Hasselbeck on the radio today. He's an ESPN analyst, and I thought he was great. Adam Amin is, I'll be honest with you, is a friend of mine. And, being in the broadcasting world, I know a lot of broadcasters. I think he's great. And Pat McAfee just brings a different energy and a different atmosphere. He's a big special teams guy. Obviously loved watching Sterling Hoffrichter punt the ball. I like that broadcast crew. I've watched them do other games. I'm fine with them. I think, people are just kind of adding them onto the list of a frustrating night. I'm not saying you have to like them if you don't, but I was fine with them. Thanks to my man Ben jumping in and letting us know, oh boy, that's not good. Syracuse has just 1 offensive lineman committed in the class of 2020, mind you, with a few months to go here, but yeah, they got to up that number because this offensive line, it's pretty much in crisis at this point. And I don't think I'm overstating that. 8 sacks tonight. I think even Holy Cross managed to sack Tommy DeVito a few times 2 weeks ago. They are in crisis. And even if Sam Heckel was out there, I still think this would be an offensive line that is having its issues. And even with Cody Conway and Coda Martin in the lineup a year ago, I think what we're finding out here, and I know I sound like a broken record, but we are finding out the deficiencies that Eric Dungey hid in that offensive line with his ability to not only scramble, run the football, but throw on the run. Keep his eyes down the field. Keep the play alive. Tommy DeVito at times, and remember, this was only his seventh start as a quarterback, but fails to go through his progressions, doesn't always look for those receivers. I think that's why Taj Harris was frustrated. He locks in on Tristan Jackson a lot. He hesitates when he's under duress. Certainly he's got to pull the ball down and run with it, but Dungey, even early in his career, was a guy who played with a lot of heart, a lot of passion, but he played smart in the sense of Eric Dungey made some reckless plays, let's be honest, but was smart in that his eyes were always down the field. They were always looking for that open receiver, and every open receiver, not just a couple of targets. So that's something that Tommy really has to learn going forward here, and learn in a hurry, because Syracuse is at a crossroads at this point. They're 3-3. They lost 3 games all of last year. And, now you start to wonder if this team is once again going to be going down the stretch trying to qualify for a bowl game. The good news for Syracuse is not a lot of good news, but the good news is the ACC is wide open. Syracuse has already played Clemson. They do not play Virginia. They do not play who's the other team I'm thinking of here that's at the top of the league right now? North Carolina has been pretty good, but Wake Forest, who is currently one of the only undefeated teams in the league, is at the end of the schedule, and we'll see what kind of team they have then. Not going to be easy by any stretch, but I think Syracuse dodges a lot of the bullets that are there in the ACC. Pittsburgh next week, rivalry game, always an interesting game, but you're back at home. I think that's a toss-up. Florida State's got a lot of speed, but Florida State's also been a mess at certain positions. I think Syracuse is going to have trouble stopping Cam Akers and kind of keeping up with the speed of Florida State. That game's on the road, so that'll be tough. If A.J. Dillon does his A.J. Dillon thing for Boston College, that could be a long day for Syracuse, but that's at home. Duke maybe looks better than we thought, but that's a game that Syracuse, I think, certainly can be competitive in, stay in like they did today. There's a bye week before that game, so there's nobody left on the ACC schedule that I think you're just completely scared of and say, no way. It's a wide open league, so it's one of those good news, bad news kind of things at this point, but Syracuse has to prove that they can score points, that they can run a functional, competent offense at this point. I can't believe I'm saying this based on what we saw in the past, but we're seeing an offense that is pretty much downright in crisis right now, 6 games into the season, and they've got to figure out the best way to kind of patch this thing up and just make it functional, because what you have is a defense that's going to keep you in games. What we're starting to see, I think, is that Maryland game was just a complete anomaly. It was just a what the heck happened there kind of thing. Second game of the year, Maryland has fallen off a cliff since then. That's football. 1 game, 2 games a year, you just kind of scratch your head and say, what the heck happened there? But by and large, you got a defense that's going to keep you in games, particularly against teams like this in the ACC. They get Andre Sisco back next week. We'll see when Ife Melanfonwu comes back. Josh Black got a little banged up tonight, so you hope it doesn't get added to the injured list. But when you have Kendall Coleman and Alton Robinson, Andrew Armstrong coming through tonight with big plays, 14 tackles, and even some secondary players. How about the hit by Eric Coley? My goodness, shook the whole stadium with that one. You have some emerging talent on defense, at the very least, that's going to keep you in games, as we saw tonight, particularly against a lot of the opponents that Syracuse has left down the stretch here. So that's the good news. But there's more bad than good, particularly an offense that is just a mess right now. So this is going to test the offensive prowess of Dino Babers, his ability to mentor quarterbacks, get them functional, and now he's got to do it with a quarterback who I don't even know what number to put it at, but Tommy is probably 70%, a bad offensive line, no running game, a frustrated passing game. What kind of spark can you put in this thing? They got some time to think about it because they will not be back on the field until next Friday night against Pittsburgh. Kind of weird to have all these Saturdays open during football season, right? Bye week last week, Thursday night game, Friday night game. Weird, but hey, we'll take it, right? Got some apple picking to do this weekend. Bob notes that don't understand why they didn't throw deep a couple times in the last minute and 48 seconds. A completion or a DPI were a real possibility. I agree with you. I think that time management was bad that whole fourth quarter. They did not run their offense with the sense of urgency they needed to. And you got to take deep shots at some point. You're running the football, short passes. And I understand that DeVito's kind of taking what's in front of him in that point and trying to keep the chains moving. But it comes a point, and you had a good note there, Bob, about how much time was on the clock. Now it's time to take shots. It's time to win that game. Let's see. Cody says, I'm convinced that this line is hindering the whole offense. I think you're 100% right. I mean, it all comes down to the offensive line. That doesn't absolve blame from Tommy. It doesn't absolve blame from some other things we can look at here, coaching and play calling and other things. But if you don't have a functional offensive line, you don't have a functional offense. So until they fix that and just make it operational, they're going to continue to struggle and have the problems that we have seen. Torrance notes a 20 straight game with at least one takeaway. Yeah, that defense continues to get takeaways. Another one tonight, this time a tip pass and an interception. So, look, your defense is keeping you in games right now. Flat out, period. Let's see. Christopher says, why play him if he's hurt? Because it just goes to show you the drop-off behind Tommy. If Clayton Welch was that good, he'd be in. Certainly if Rex Culpepper was that good, he'd be in. And, you don't want to what-if it to death, but you got to remember there was a quarterback who had some talent that was on the Syracuse roster, Chance Amy, who ended up transferring. I wonder if he's regretting that decision now, because if the offense continues to slide like this, would he have given Tommy a run for his money to get in there? Last year, you had a really good offensive line, at least by all appearances you did, which Eric Dungy hid some of its deficiencies, but I think we all agree last year's offensive line was better than this year's. You had two capable, even starting quarterbacks on the roster, right? So you could take some more chances and do some more things on offense. There's a drop-off clearly this year that maybe we overestimated. Look, there's 6 games to go. I'm not pulling the ripcord by any stretch at this point on Tommy DeVito overall, because he's your guy. You ride or die with Tommy. Why play him if he's hurt? Because Clayton Welch is not capable of running this offense the way he does, and certainly Rex Culpepper is not. But if Tommy keeps playing this hurt and keeps playing at times with the decision-making he has, I don't know. There could be a crossroads there. There could be a decision. And Dino will look at the numbers, and he'll look at the offense, and he'll look at his quarterback's got the ball in his hands with a chance to win late. He did play a little better in the second half than the first. I think Dino's going to ride Tommy DeVito as far as he can. His guy, Elite 11 quarterback, 4-star guy, groomed to be the quarterback. Like, you don't bail on that after 6 games, particularly if there's nobody behind him pushing him. And that's where it comes back to recruiting, right? Well, why didn't they recruit? And they actually did have a guy there who they felt maybe could help out and push Tommy a little bit, but he ended up transferring. So them's the breaks, as they say. Recruiting never stops. But, Syracuse has Christian Valou, a 4-star prospect that they're chasing down, a couple other quarterbacks that are on the radar screen. So, that's the future. That's looking ahead. They've got to line up somebody else at this point. But for now, it's ride or die with Tommy, even when he's only 65, 70%, which he appears to be at this point. All right. What do you say we end it right there? Really appreciate you guys staying up late, past midnight, Thursday into Friday morning. We'll have plenty more on syracuse.com. My recap will be up bright and early Friday morning. If you are watching this live, thank you so much for doing that. If you are watching it on YouTube, we appreciate that too. We do put all these chats up on YouTube, but we are live after every game on the Syracuse Orange Football Facebook page, thanks to our friends at Krause Health. Thanks for hanging with us tonight. We'll be back next Friday. Orange Panthers at the Carrier Dome, 7 o'clock kickoff this time. The Orange back on ESPN. Hopefully we'll have a better showing with their next opportunity in prime time, but not a good one tonight for sure against NC State. Have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon here on Facebook Live.